Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hit and Hustle from IRSportsDaily.com. I am your host, as always, Greg Flamong, and joining me in his regular seat, Jamie Ueyama. Jamie, you seated the seat to Christian on Monday for our recruiting update show. Glad to have you back. How are you doing on this wonderful Wednesday?
I'm doing great. Great job with both you and Christian on the one on Monday. Awesome to get those updates from Christian. Obviously, he's always super plugged in. So yeah, it was great. I thought it was a great show.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was good to have him on, and like for me, I love the updates, right? Like, and I think everyone loves the recruiting updates, like especially after a good weekend of there's a ton of uncommitted players on campus and committed players, and you always want updates. And Christian came with some really good info, so hopefully we can do that again next week. And get another show going because we got a bunch of recruiting stuff coming up this next weekend too with a bunch of visitors. So, but we wanted to do a mailbag episode today. Just talk about whatever with the Notre Dame program. We got a bunch of questions from IRSportsDaily.com customers from the message board, and we're going to hit on those. It's recruiting, what if questions about Jimmy Clausen. We got a really good one for Jamie about how he goes through his process of evaluating players, which I'm actually very interested to find out about. Because to me, that's a very interesting topic. So why don't we just jump right in? And actually, let me pull up the message board here. I'll pull up the question and then I'll say who sent it in a second. So the first question is over under 1.5 late recruiting, 1.5 late recruiting losses, committed guys going elsewhere in 2023 that will be attributable to NIL deals. What do you think about that?
Under for sure. Just because I just think that like the guys that who would be getting like big money are the guys that will get like they would be out right now. You know what I mean? Like they're getting those big offers already, So I don't think there's anything that's going to come in and like kind of like with like a sweetheart deal at the end for any of those guys if that's what they're looking for. And then also too, like most of the guys, I mean, I would say pretty much all of the guys that are committed to Notre Dame, that's not like their primary motivation.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I guess there could be somebody who commits late that Notre Dame gets or whatever, and that he's kind of like unexpected, and then they become like the unexpected, then they unexpected again, flip again. That could happen, but I just don't see there's going to be multiple guys. Maybe one guy at the very end, something like that kind of scenario, but I don't see it.
Yeah, like I think if an NIL thing is going to be a big factor, then they won't be committed. Like they won't commit in the first place. Like, so I don't know. I don't want to like speculate on who, but I could see uncommitted players. I could see uncommitted, like losing an uncommitted player to an NIL situation where it's like maybe otherwise.
Yeah, that 100% could see, but
And frankly, like that might be the issue with DeAndre Moore, frankly, or at least one
yeah,
of them.
with a lot of guys, whatever,
Right.
right? Like, there's definitely like guys that like, you know what I mean? You're like, oh, they had like, I thought they had a better shot at this guy, and then you're like, oh, they don't. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's definitely got something to do with it with a few of them.
Yeah. So that first question came from Irish Bronx. So I wanted to give you give him attribution for that. This next question is for EXRND 1994 from the message board. Do you feel it's better for Notre Dame to get as many quality players they can, even if it means they overload a position like offensive line or defensive line, or better to fill out and have a balanced class?
You know what? I do think it's good to overload. And it was something that I'm kind of writing about in Six Thoughts, that you never regret signing too many good players.
Yeah.
You only regret later on when it's like, oh, you didn't sign enough at a certain position. It's never a regret, right? So as long as you're kind of coming under the limit, and unless like if you're not going to be able to sign, if it means like not taking at a position of need instead of that, then I don't think that's a good idea. But if you're just going to add just because it's a good player, I think that's the right thing to do, because I think in like, say, offensive line, for example, right? Like they're going to have a lot of guys on scholarship in 2023. I mean, Patterson and Lugg will be gone for sure, but everybody else, like, I mean, Kristofic and Carell technically will have graduated, depending on how their year goes. Maybe their goes, but even if you took them off, that's still going to be a lot of guys. So you have to figure that some guys are going to bounce anyways because of like just how things have gone with them for their career. So I guess it's kind of like what will probably happen. But even then, it's going to just like eventually flesh itself out, because these guys graduate. Most of them graduate within 3 years now, especially if you enrolled early, right? So so I just think like their defensive line, like, so I mean, you're not going to say no to Jason Moore, and then if Samuel Mpembo comes, you're like, heck yeah, right? So it's like, I just don't see, like, you're never going to regret that. You're never going to regret that going forward. And the numbers on the team and how that thing, it'll just work itself out, because there will be guys who just eventually, like, they end up leaving. Like, it's how it's always worked, right? And it's not even just like cutting guys or pushing them out. A lot of them just see the writing on the wall.
Right. How many defensive linemen did A&M take last cycle? Wasn't it like 7 or 8?
I think they took 8.
Like yeah, so you just like,
and like 5 of them were 5 stars.
Yeah, if they want to come, then you take them. And it's funny because this is like a new problem, right? Because I remember last year around this time, actually, I was texting with Matt about wide receiver recruiting, and it was like the numbers even then were like a problem. And I was like, we need to take like 3 or 4. Like we need to take 4. We can't just take 3.
The whole taking 3 thing was just bizarre to me.
Right. It
only
was
take 3. Like, what? Have you seen the amount of scholarships you have right now? Like,
yeah, that's a whole nother issue. Yeah. It's frankly not a problem with the Notre Dame staff at this point. But he was saying, I don't know that there are 3 that want to come. Yeah. And I think that now you look at all these positions, like you could see there are way more that want to come than there are technically positions that you have for them, right? Like Notre Dame could take more linebackers if they wanted. They could take more tight ends if they wanted, but it's like they're not going to push for those things because they're full and they have other positions. But like offensive line, defensive line, maybe corner. It's like wide receiver. It could get to that point where it's like, I don't want to say turn guys away, but it's like they're not really going to make big pushes for guys that maybe they would in previous cycles, because they recruit the board so well. Yeah. This group that you have more that frankly want to come, that you have spots for.
So. I think the one that has always kind of been an issue with Notre Dame too is that Notre Dame has never been like State U or anything like that, where like Ohio State can come in on an Ohio kid who's been committed to Michigan State forever and pop in with an offer in the last 3 weeks before signing day and then just take them, right? Like that happens quite a bit with, if there's a kid they really, really like, and there's that, and like USC used to do it all the time with kids in California. I mean, obviously there's things like going that in Florida and the South and all that. Georgia that does that, that happens too, for sure. Oklahoma gets kids like that, like Texas, etc. Right? Like that happens quite a bit where they can like get late in the game. And Notre Dame doesn't really have that, because if there's like a really good kid from like Fort Wayne, for instance, they're in on that kid early, right? And then even if they're in on him, but they maybe like he's not at the top of their board, usually kind of what happens is that kid has like been to Notre Dame several times, and then Notre Dame maybe, gets full at a certain position. So if a spot opens up, that guy usually feels pretty bitter about it, right? Like, where Ohio State can be like, we never even had you on campus, man. Like, we didn't even care. But that's like, now we care because you're good. Like, but Notre Dame doesn't have that kind of relationship with guys. So it's like, so it's weird. So like in that receiver situation last year, it wasn't like they just had like some guy in their back pocket. And that's my one worry about this. And we were kind of just chatting offline about the receiver situation this year. And depending on what happens, like they still look like they're in a good spot, but you have to kind of see how it plays out.
Right.
But I mean, I like Malik Elzy, but it's obviously they're not pushing for Malik Elzy. And if you don't push for him now and he ends up going somewhere else, are you going to regret it later? I don't know, right? And it's not like there's another receiver just popping out of nowhere from Illinois that you can just go get, right? So that's the kind of like that's the rub with Notre Dame recruiting in terms of like local and being able to take guys late.
Right. All right, let's move on to the next question from he's got a couple here. JPDOC31. This is his first one. What are 2-3 questions that you hope never again get from all of us, either this cycle or in general? Do you have an answer to this?
I don't know. You know what? I don't really get annoyed by any of the questions, to be honest. I've never really like, there's never been like a constant thing like, well, what's going on with this? Because Notre Dame has as long as I've done this, like Notre Dame has always been pretty good across the board. Like there's a couple things that get annoying during the thing, like with a certain recruit, like Amorion Walker last cycle, right? Like, yeah, any kind of questions about him, like it was annoying for sure, especially when it was like pretty obvious to everyone except for Notre Dame, apparently, that things were not trending good for them. So I guess like Dante Moore questions are kind of annoying, but it's like, I don't think that's not Dante Moore's fault. So it's like, I can't really get mad.
I mean, it's not anyone's fault. Like, of course we're going to get this question.
And people are, I'm sorry, he's a big time quarterback. People are interested. And I mean, I'm sorry, like even if Dante Moore doesn't sign with Notre Dame, well, you know what? Thanks, Dante Moore, because you gave our Sports Daily a ton of traffic. People talked about him. Any story that was written about him. I wrote 6 thoughts. 3 of my thoughts were on Dante Moore last week. It was like I mean, it usually does pretty well, but this one I think had maybe a little bit of a bump because of it too. Like that, people care a lot. It's just like people would pop into the chat sometimes on here and be like, "Did they say anything about Moore?" Like people care. So it's like I'm not going to hate on anyone for caring about that kind of thing.
Yeah, the tough part with him specifically this cycle and like other cycles too is I think that people think we are holding out things that we know on him, and it's like we really don't. We don't. Like there's a lot that we don't know, and the thing that I don't
Notre Dame wish they knew more,
right? And I think that the thing that people don't appreciate enough is that when you try like a recruitment like this that can with so many kind of moving parts that everyone kind of knows about, right? Like everyone knows about them, is that things in real time, things are very fluid and they change all the time. So it's not that the info is bad or whatever. It's just that it can change and everyone kind of understands that. So that's why when we always say, like, we just have to wait and see, like you have to wait and see. And it's frustrating for subscribers and viewers and everyone. I mean, it's frustrating for us too, because we want answers also.
You know what? Actually, I do have an amendment to my answer. Well, I don't like when people ask questions about coaches when they're like they're searching for you to rip on a coach. Right?
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that. And I understand, whatever. It's part of being a college football fan. You don't like the O-line coach. You don't like the DB coach. You don't like it, whatever. You don't like the OC. You don't like this, whatever, right? Like you think this guy's doing a bad job, whatever, right? Like I get it, right? But I don't like when people ask these like leading questions. They're hoping that you're just gonna say Jeff Quinn sucks, right? Like they want you to say that. I don't like doing that. And it's not like I have like a personal relationship with Jeff Quinn or one of these guys. Like it's not because of that. It's just because I know that like most of these guys are, really good coaches. Maybe they're not doing the greatest job or something's missing or whatever, or maybe you can get a better coach. But I don't like, when having to rip on these coaches or being like kind of led to that, like we're only here so you rip on Dell. Like that's what like it felt like a lot of stuff last year was. And it was true. Like it was one of those things where like Dell, it was like, well, Dell better get CJ Williams and Amorian Walker, or else it's not like, but if he does, then great. But he didn't. So whatnot. But it's like I didn't like the whole idea of like, well, let's spend this next few, every power hour people asking about Dell just to rip on him.
Right. So this is sort of on topic. It kind of isn't, but it's something that I feel strongly about. Is like I think that we need to have humility in this job, right? Because we are commentators and we are observers, and look, we give you our opinion, and people like that opinion, and they watch the show and they trust us to tell the truth and all those other things, and that's fine, right? Like if something's not good, I'll say it's not good, right? And I tell this to my daughter all the time. I'm not going to say something is a good job if it's not a good job, right? And so that's how it is. At the same time, like the players especially, they're the ones doing it, not us, right? They're the ones putting it on the line, right? And the thing about with recruiting is like we are all begging these guys to want to attend Notre Dame, right? Because it's the team we all cheer for and it's everything. Like that's what we want. And then they get here and then they don't do something in a game that we like, and we're just and it's like the same thing, right? Like I got a question about there's a question in here about Clarence Lewis, and it's like, look, the way it was worded, it's like he's I switched up the wording in the question because it's like we can talk about as a matter of fact that he struggled or whatever, but like
but it's like you have to
not going to
you have to start
guy.
off saying he sucks. Like that's what people
like,
want, right?
You don't
I
have
don't
to do
I
that.
don't like I hate those questions. I'm certain those questions, like whatever. And I know I just mentioned coaches, but for players, especially the players, really, like I don't like that kind of stuff. Like it doesn't, that's not and that's why too, like I always root if first of all too, I don't care if you're someone who's coached or played. I don't care if you're a Notre Dame fan or you're a college football fan of that team or what. Like, no one should be rooting for these kids to fail, right? And like, I'm rooting for like Clarence Lewis had definitely had a rough Fiesta Bowl, had like some rough games last year. Well, you know what? I'm rooting for him to be in a better situation and do better this year. So like,
Right.
I think it's like not only is that good for him, it's good for Notre Dame. I don't think he's a bad football player, right? So I just think when you look at that kind of stuff too, I don't like those leading questions where they're expecting to be like, should this guy like, he's pretty trash. Like, just get rid of him or move him to another position. Like, I'm just not a fan of that. I'm not a fan.
All right, we can move on. And this question is from the same poster, and this is a really good one actually. Jamie, what is your process for film reviews, such as who you review, when you do so, how film comes your way, the amount of film don't lie that are written and not published, etc.?
Yeah, this is a great question. Okay, so who I review is, I review every kid who gets an offer from Notre Dame. First off, like that's straight up, like any kid who gets offered by Notre Dame, I review. Typically, when I do so, a lot of it is after they get offered. But sometimes, like if I know a guy is like visiting, or I know this guy's going to be whatever, or probably going to get offered, or anyone like that, like yeah, I'll watch them before. How film comes my way, I have to search for it. Like, just that's not like we don't have like a database. We don't have like a subscription service where we're getting it. So yeah, I have to search for it. Often Huddle is, there's a lot on Huddle. You could find stuff on YouTube. I like, as I kind of like dive deeper into guys, I'll look for just anywhere I can find it. And like, here's a perfect example, Elijah Page, which I honestly think this is part of the reason why he was like underrated, because his Huddle page only had his sophomore film, and his junior film was on his Twitter, and it was on his Twitter. And if you didn't go to his Twitter, you wouldn't be able to watch his junior film. And so I honestly think some of these people were like, oh, that's all I saw is the sophomore stuff. I was like, maybe he was hurt as a junior. Whatever. So they just graded him off that, and they didn't like, and where all they had to do was look at a Twitter, right? So yeah, so you got to find it in any way you can, kind of thing. Amount of film don't lie that are written and not published. There's not a lot. Most of the guys we know beforehand they're going to commit. There are over the last, like, say 4 years, there's maybe a handful of guys. Like, I could go and because there was like buzz that there was like, there's a good chance this guy's going to commit.
Yeah.
Or maybe they gave a silent and then nothing happened with it. Like it's happened, right? It's happened. So yeah, there's a handful of guys. Most of the guys are done. The way I usually do it in terms of film and stuff is I will watch kids and watch their film and not take any notes, not put any grade on it or anything like that. And then I'll go back later on and then watch and then like update a grade and all that kind of stuff too. So there's a lot of like, so I've watched every 2024 kid. I haven't put a grade in on every 2024 kid because I just like, I'm like just behind on some of these guys that I got to update. And the other thing is just like, I don't like just watching initially because sometimes I like see things and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, okay. It's just good to review it, I think, a few times.
Yeah, you always want that first impression. And then you go back and you just kind of like, oh, like you see their technical aspects or you're looking for something specific. But sometimes you want a good feel for a player. Another trick to finding tape on a player is, maybe they don't have a highlight tape, but their high school will post sometimes like full games on YouTube. Or like there's some stream that you can find, and then you can sometimes find full games on that. So that's super helpful as well. And this question is kind of on a piggyback from a different poster. It's a Ghost Revival 2008. And so I'll put it up here. When determining where Notre Dame targets rank compared to recruits across the nation, how do you account for the inherent bias that likely come from seeing the Notre Dame targets in person? And I cut this question down because it was too long to fit into the little application here. But it's basically asking so you do a top 50, right?
Yep.
But you're seeing more Notre Dame players because just you're
because in camp target. If you're at like
So how do you filter in your, I guess, process of like comparing them to other recruits that Notre Dame isn't in on?
Well, one is like, and it hasn't been as easy like post-pandemic to go out to some of these other national camps or whatever. But like one is you go to like national camps and you see like a lot of other guys that are playing and you don't just watch ND commits. So that's ND commits or ND targets. So that's part of it. That's definitely part of it. The other thing is that I just literally, seeing guys in person is great. And I mean, for sure, if I didn't see Blake Fisher in person when I saw him in person, I never would have had him graded as high as I did just based off of his like sophomore film. Mm-hmm. But then I saw him in person and I was like, oh, like what, like why? I'm like, more people must have not seen him in person or else they would have him rated higher. So yeah, there is a little bit of bias if you see a guy like that. But I mean, I still base it primarily off of like playing football. That's the main thing. So that's where I'm always going to weight it. And if you look at like, where, my like ISD Fab 50 over the last few years, it's not like loaded with Notre Dame targets,
right.
Like it's a lot of like Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State kids and stuff too, that I'm like, man, it would have been pretty cool if Notre Dame was in on these guys, but it's so, and I think it's just, there's some guys, it's just like, obviously it's fairly obvious. Right. And I also want to like be credible. So I'm not trying to overrate Notre Dame kids, even if I like see them in person and I like something about them. I'm not going to try to overrate guys based on it when I'm thinking about like other guys, because a lot of times when I've gone to like camps too, like, and this is something that has definitely changed with Notre Dame kids, is that before, like if you went to the opening, so like when I went to the opening in like 2015 or 2016, whatever, the Notre Dame kids, you look at them and you're like, oh, I mean, they look like athletes, they look big, whatever, but it's like, oh my gosh, is there a difference between them and the guys who are like the dudes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in recent years, you see a lot more of the Notre Dame kids kind of fitting in with those
Yeah.
guys. And that's also like, so like Fisher is a perfect example because he's a guy like right away, he looks like he's going to play on Georgia's old line, right? Because that's a kid that normally in the Midwest, you're just not going to see a kid that size who moves like that. Compared to, so like I've been to like a ton of those, Nike regional camps, UA camps, whatever, like regional camps or like Irish Invasion and stuff. And it's different than when you go to a camp, like the opening and like when it's national camps and you see like Alex Leatherwood and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe this kid is 17 or whatever. Right. Like, so yeah, I think, because of that, I've seen enough people in person and I've done this for long enough too, that I think that I'm like, if I was only just focusing on that, I think actually doing the IC 550, if I wasn't doing the IC 550, I think I'd be worse at the job because I would probably have too much bias towards just Notre Dame targets. Right. Because I'm looking at these other national guys too. I think it's good because you get to kind of compare and you're like, oh, like this guy, he's a good player, but it's like, he's not 6'7" with like this, pterodactyl wingspan and like another level of twitch. Like, and when you watch that, that's when you kind of learn where like maybe Notre Dame's missing certain things, right? Too. And that's why when they get a guy like a Keon Keeley or a Blake Fisher or whatever, it's like, it stands out.
Right. Okay. Moving on, this Notre Dame ND through and through. Can you tell us your thoughts why Buckner did not play in the Fiesta Bowl?
I think we will have talked about this a lot. Yeah, like I think based on how the first half, they scored 28 points in the first half. They were very successful. Jack Cohn was playing really well. I think that had a ton to do with it. And then I think it was like I think they didn't want to put him in a situation where he was going to fail.
Yeah.
And if you all of a sudden it's like 5 minutes left in the third quarter and it's like, Buckner, get out there. You going in this series, right? That's a tough spot to put him in. And I think that was the thinking. Should they probably have played? In hindsight, I bet like Tommy Rees looks back and it's like, man, I wish I would have used him in this spot or that, whatever, right? But I think just the way the game flowed, I think it made sense to not play him at that time. And it's only in hindsight where you look at it and you're like, wow, they really should.
Wow, he didn't play. Yeah, like yeah. It reminds me of the 2019 Michigan game where you could go back and there's probably like if they were ever going to put him, there's like one series where it's like if they were going to do it, this is the one. But all the other ones, it kind of makes sense, right? Because like I remember in the Michigan game in 2019, like Ian was really struggling, and it was like you should probably pull him. And there was one drive where it's like if it doesn't happen, like if Notre Dame doesn't do something here, you should pull him, right? Well, then they went down and scored, and it was 17-7, and then it was like we're not going to pull him now, and then Michigan went down and scored again, so it was 24-7. The game was over at that point. So, and they eventually.
But that was right. That's a classic example of like, when did they put him in? That's exactly why. If you look at the bigger picture of the game, you're like, why didn't they play Dracovic in there? It's like, well, because of this is the exact moment. That's why it didn't make sense at that exact moment.
Right. So like at the end of the first half against Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl, Notre Dame's up 28-7, right? And then famously right before the half, Oklahoma State goes down and scores. So it's 28-14. Notre Dame doesn't try to do anything before the half is over. And then, so that's like a non-possession, right? You're not going to put them in for that. And then Oklahoma State gets the ball to start the second half and they go down and score. So now it's 28-21. Not a great time to bring in your quarterback who hasn't played in the first half. And he didn't play in the first half because Jack Cohn was balling.
Yeah.
Right? Like no one was calling for Tyler Buckner in the first half. So like, there's just games.
I think like 11 of their 13 opponents didn't score 28 points all game against. They scored in the first half. So it's like, it's hindsight is different than what was actually going on in the game. And I think that's kind of as simple as that.
Right. So that's kind of what our opinion on it. So this one is from, I think, Irish Bronx again. Talking about the NIL thing. Any updates on how Brady Quinn's NIL project is going? I don't have updates. I know that I've seen things on Twitter about players doing charitable things, and I know that
I just saw like Olivia Miles, the ND women's basketball player, the point guard, who's phenomenal. If anyone hasn't watched the ND women's basketball, she's going to be a star. She already kind of is, but she was like doing stuff at like working with dogs at like a dog shelter or something like that. And I was like, this has to be that or whatever. Right. Like,
anytime you see a Notre Dame player post something on Twitter about some charitable event that they're doing, and a lot of the time it's like 4 or 5 of them. That's probably what that is. Right. So, I would say, cause they're not going to put it out there. Right. Like,
and they shouldn't have to. It's like, it's not like, they're like, I got paid $5,000 to go do like, to show up at this charity thing, like, and it looks totally disingeneous. It looks terrible.
Yeah. So, but follow players on Twitter, and that's how you'll kind of get a feel for what's going on. Next question. If let me see if I can. Oh, it's from Irish Bronx as well. If Ronan Hanafin is ultimately Irish, where do you see him playing? What's his upside at that position?
I mean, I see him playing receiver as of now. I think his best position is honestly going to be linebacker, like a rover type. I think that's what his best position. I don't know if that's where he's going to end up, but like that's where I think that when I watch his film, I just think that's where his greatest upside is. But I do think that, like, I mean, he's a talented player. Like, he's a talented receiver. I think that he can play. I think he can play a receiver and be a pretty good one. And I also think too, when we were kind of talking about like body types and whatever, he's different body type than some of these other guys. He's like going to be like a bigger boundary guy, I think. So, I think because of that too, that what's kind of makes him a good fit in the class too.
I said it with Christian on Monday. I just think that there's a little Chase Claypool in there, the way he runs.
Chase Claypool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I just think he's that kind of athlete. He's a smooth runner. When he runs, he kind of glides. And I think Chase does the same thing. They're just both kind of gliders. And I think the more that he learns the receiver position, because right now you could tell, like, there's the go routes and then there's slant routes, and now that's fine. But anytime there's like he's kind of a nuanced
he's just a big athlete. He's like the big skill, like the old Brian Kelly thing, the big skill. He's a big
skill guy. So like you see him anytime he's like runs some kind of dig or curl or like a little out, it's like, that's not too sharp. But when he runs like a go or he runs a post, or you get him like see him on a punt return or something like that, then it's like, oh, okay, like now you can see
football player.
So that's talk about upside. Like that's where I see him. I would say Claypool, which I think everyone would be excited about.
I think they'd be thrilled.
All right, so let's see. Here's another one about Tyler Buckner. Let me just pick it in. So Irish in Orlando. Assuming Buckner starts, assuming he stays healthy, what do you predict his year will look like?
I think he's going to have a great year if he stays healthy. I think he's going to be, like one of the better dual threat guys in the country. Like, I think, like, I don't know if I would say like he's going to be a top. I wouldn't go as far as saying he's going to be a top 10 quarterback in the country, but if I think top 25 quarterback in the country, I think is definitely something that I could see him doing. And I mean, I think the ceiling is for him to go higher than that. But I think, being a top 25 quarterback in the country, I think is probably what I would predict.
Do you think that he can be Ian Book as a passer in 2018?
Yeah, I think he can be that.
Okay. So, because he's definitely a better runner than Ian. Ian's a very good
Yes.
runner. Definitely a better. So if he is Ian Book in 2018 as a passer this year, that's a very, very good quarterback, right? Like Notre Dame went to the playoffs and finished the regular season undefeated with Ian Book. Now, obviously, they're playing better competition this year than the 2018 team did, and Ian Book didn't have to face the 2018 Michigan defense either. So, but yeah, I think that people are kind of forgetting that Tyler Buckner came in as a passer who could run. And I think that last year has really skewed people's idea of him as a player, what his upside is, and all those other things. Like, he is a slinger. He is the type of guy that I would feel completely comfortable putting in empty and letting him operate. He has a quick release. He can throw on the run. He's accurate. And, he showed a couple occasions last year he can throw a pretty good deep ball. Unfortunately, we didn't see any of this in the spring for reasons that everyone knows about because of his injury. So, but yeah, I mean, just look at what he did in the spring game last year when he hadn't played football. He had gotten the number of practices that you get in the spring, and he came out and he looked good throwing it in that type of setting, right? This is a year after that when he's going to be a lot more comfortable. He's going to be a lot more physically mature. If you're telling me he's going to be healthy, Notre Dame's got a really, really good quarterback in 2022.
You know what? This is going to be my one question about him this year, which I think we're going to have to kind of wait and see how it plays out, because I think the one thing with Ian Book, horrible awareness of when to throw away the ball and not run out of bounds for a 2-yard sack. Did it multiple times. Very Orlovsky of him, of the awareness.
Maybe that's why Orlovsky loves him so much.
Yeah, but he was fantastic at escaping and doing things and creating in that way, right? Like creating, as we call improv yards, right? And with Buckner, I want him to, it's awesome. You want him to be win from the pocket, but I don't know his feel yet of does he have the feel of, no, I got to get out here. I got to try to create. And you see some of that obviously from his junior year of high school, but haven't really seen it with him at even at a Notre Dame practice yet. So yeah, I'm something I'll be watching for. Hopefully we get to see more than a few practices. And
fingers crossed, man, or else I might have to complain again.
Yeah.
All right. This one from INCCW. Clarence Lewis has struggled some at the corner position. If other younger guys unseat him and move him further down the depth chart, could he possibly make the switch to wide receiver for a body?
Yeah, and this was that one we were kind of talking about. No, I don't know. I don't think so. I think he's, I mean, at that point, it's Clarence Lewis, you might as well just ask him to quit the team. If he's not unless he really wants to play receiver, right? That's an Isaiah Robertson thing where it's okay, well, I guess you move to linebacker and then all of a sudden 2 practices later you're at receiver. You went from safety to linebacker to I don't know. I don't see it happening. I mean, I could easily see him not being unseated and not start, could happen, but I don't see him moving to receiver. Yeah, I don't everybody and people will like that with kind of X Watts too. It's man, if he's not starting, it's he's not gonna be starting there either. So it's he's just gonna be you really gotta be just you're taking one for the team. And I don't know if I don't know if anyone would want to do that, to be honest. And I don't blame them. So I don't think so.
So just in general, in my opinion, you don't want to move a player from a position where they will play to a position where it's you're a body,
And you don't know what's going to happen with injuries and all this kind of stuff.
He started last season.
He started as a freshman too. Right, it's not it's he's played a lot of football. And okay, this is when I think of Clarence Lewis, I think of a lot of like, I mean, could he? I mean, everyone wants to think like everyone has nightmares of Gary Gray, Clifford Jefferson, right? All of these like guys in the past who like struggled, and then it was like that was the end for them, basically, right? Like that was the thing. And I think that's when people get like PTSD flashbacks of those guys.
Yeah.
But like, there's also guys like Matthias Farley, who I mean started on that 2012 defense, that great 2012 defense, and then kind of like slowly lost his job. Like the next year, lost his job at the end of the year, and then never gained it back. Never was a starter again, but was still a good player and has played in the NFL for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And really, if you go back to it, you're like Matthias Farley, who started as a receiver, you could be like, man, Matthias Farley. Like if they had to think, there would have been people asking questions about Matthias Farley moving to receiver because he was like there. It's like, yeah, you should maybe do that. It's like, well, no, because he still played for Notre Dame and played well enough to like get into camp and then make an NFL roster and all this kind of stuff too. So regardless of what happens with Clarence Lewis, like you're a better team with Clarence Lewis at defensive back than you are as like just a dude playing receiver. Like, and I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to impact anything at receiver if he moved. So yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, you don't want it just a practice player. He's already played for you at corner. You know what? Look, whether he gets all the reps or whatever the reps are, I don't know. But he's played for you at corner. You know he can play, and so you need to coach him. Coach him. You know, I think the move to the field will be better for him too. Like he was miscast as a boundary guy, and I think something we don't talk about a lot is Cam Hart missed the spring because of his shoulder. I wonder if they moved when that injury occurred for Cam Hart because he had the shoulder harness on a lot of last year. Maybe they moved him off the boundary because they didn't want him playing that physical brand because he
you have to tackle. Yeah, there's a lot of it makes sense. It makes sense.
So look, get Clarence Lewis to the field, get him in a better situation. Maybe that improves his game. But I don't advocate for moving him to offense. So this next question is from the same poster. If Carr is able to reclassify, wouldn't it make more sense from a personal business decision to be coached by college coaches sooner than spending an extra year in high school?
You know what? I think this is kind of like the Buckner situation, right? Where he could have stayed in instead of enrolling early. And obviously Carr's played a lot more football than Buckner because there was different circumstance for Buckner, but he could have stayed in high school and played that spring semester of high school football that was moved back because of the pandemic, right, in California. So, and he didn't, and then he played, and really, this is actually funny because it's another thing I'm writing about the thing. It's like we're either going to look back on that if like Buckner comes in and is like really good this year, then people will be like, man, he really made the right decision, like coming in early and getting coached up and having that experience, whatever. And then if he looks like super raw and they're like, oh man, this guy just needed more reps or whatever, people are going to say that he really made the wrong decision. Should have stayed, should have played more. He would have been better if he got these reps, whatever. Right. And I know it's not as black and white as that, but that's how a lot of people will paint it. And I don't know what is like the best, business decision because so if Carr comes and then he's like working with Tommy Rees, so that's good that he's working with Tommy Rees or whatever if he comes in. But what if Buckner's the starter and he's just like the third string quarterback or whatever? Is that good? And rather than him playing like actual like 15 games and winning a state championship and getting all these reps and whatever, like, I don't know. I couldn't say that it is for sure. Like, I guess it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, well, is it better to go to the G League or go to Europe and play against men, or is it better to go to like college basketball and do this, or you're going to get more games? And it's like, I think it's just depends on the player, and it's very different. And I don't know, like, I'm also in favor of like, I totally understand why Notre Dame would want him to like reclassify to 2023. And then all of a sudden, okay, well, now we got this taken care of, and then we can go on and get another guy in 2024, right? I get that part, right? Because obviously they have a lot more time to kind of catch up on 2024 if that's the case. But if the kid doesn't want to do it, is that a good thing? And you're like, man, you're really pushing them to do it. I don't know if that's good. I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on that. And I think at the moment he doesn't want to do it. So maybe his mind will change. I don't know.
Right. So I think prior to committing to Notre Dame, it was a not something I want to do kind of thing. Just he said that to Christian, right? So like as of today, he's that's not what the plan is. I do think now that it's in his mind, and now that last week he was on campus, right? And he was talking to 2023 guys, right? Because he was there with all the 2023 recruits that were on campus, and that'll be the case. That'll be the case maybe going forward, right? And he's going to be talking to more 2023 guys, and I think that the more he does that, and the more he kind of wraps his mind around the fact that maybe I do want to join the class, then and I think that makes it more likely. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. As far as the business decision end of it, and we got another question. This is from Murph JD about, does Notre Dame offer a quarterback in the 2023 class, or is it more bust? I think something for CJ Carr to at least consider, right, and his family and all those people, is that, let's say you bring in someone like Brock Glenn. I'm just going to throw him out there. Notre Dame may offer him, may not, whatever. I'm just going to say Brock Glenn. Look, who's like, I watched this film. I thought he was a pretty good player, right? Like, can play at Notre Dame, would be a good addition to the class, right? So let's say Brock Glenn comes in, and for whatever reason, something happens where he gets a chance to come in and play, right? And he does something similar to what Ian Book did in 2018, where he comes in, it's like, we got something here, right? Or Deshaun Kaiser in 2015, where you don't expect them. You think, oh, come in and, win a game or two for us. And then they come in and play really well. And it's like, now it's a situation where, like, I don't know, like Notre Dame has a decision to make. It's like, this guy's playing really well, but then we got this guy in who's the freshman and the 5-star who kind of is coming here. We thought he was going to be the future. And, and now there's a decision. Like, do you want that 2023 spot to be your spot, or do you want someone else to have it? And then they can, have an opportunity to, make a case for themselves, right? That's something that they have to consider, right? I don't know what's best. What's best is up to them. It's not up to us or me or you or whoever. It's all about what, kind of what they want to do. But, there's a lot of moving pieces to this.
By the way, I just looked it up too. There's like ant crawling on my leg. But there, out of the top 33 quarterbacks, 28 of the top 33 quarterbacks are currently committed. So, and like the guys who aren't, it's like Arch Manning, Brock Glenn, who you mentioned, DeAndre Moore, Lonergan, and one other guy that I can't remember. But like, anyways, it's like Moore is the only guy that they're in on out of it. I mean, maybe they could get in with Brock Glenn or whatever, but chances are they would have to go and try to flip somebody, right?
Yeah.
If they decide to do it. But I really think they have to. So here's the thing. It's like, it doesn't matter whether you're like, man, we're still going to go in for more or whatever. They have to like make some kind of decision here in the next few weeks, because they have to bring in someone, and whether that's reclassifying Carr or him deciding to reclassify or bring in another guy, whatever, they have to get somebody, because you don't want to be in a situation where Ronnie Powless is your third quarterback in 2023. You just don't.
And we say bring in a transfer, but like, if Buckner is good, who wants?
If Buckner's really good, what transfer is going to want to come?
Yeah,
that's any good.
To do that.
Maybe you can get like some guy who's like, I'm happy to be the backup and whatever, but like, that guy's, you don't even want him. You know what I mean? There's no like,
right.
So it's, I don't know. I really do think they have to get somebody in 2023, no matter how it happens. So More great, whatever it is, they got to have something.
Yeah, and that's why I think that if Dante Moore, goes somewhere else, so they feel like he's trending away, that's what I feel like the reclassification thing will pick up a little bit, just because it'll seem to make more sense, and the more time you have to wrap your mind around it, I think it makes it more likely. But we'll see. It has to play out. We'll see how Tyler Buckner does. Let's see how CJ Carr does. It's all there's a lot to be determined there. Any word on how Al Golden is recruiting? Haven't heard his name mentioned.
I heard his name mentioned from this past weekend. Seemed to make a pretty big impression on Caleb Downs. That's for sure. So that's really good. So, I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard him like in like stories on like linebackers, but you have to remember that when he came, they already had Bowen and Zinter, right? So it's really just Osbury's kind of like the only guy left. And that was a guy who's already being recruited by Freeman, Chad Bowden, and Al Washington was his recruiter there too. So it's not like, so he's kind of like coming in late. It's not like he's the main guy coming in to establish a relationship. So, and they haven't really done anything at other positions. So haven't heard a ton of him like being involved with like, man, he's really getting in on all these other guys, but I don't know. I mean, I guess jury's out. I think you want to hear a little bit more about him, but certainly I think when he's making an impact with guys on campus, that's important.
Yeah, and the linebacker position is like, so you got Freeman, you got Golden, you got Laurinaitis.
Yeah,
it kind of helps when you got Freeman. He's the defensive face of the program.
Yeah,
so,
definitely,
especially at this point. So, all right. Moving on. While Clausen did not have a good O-line in college to help his mobility limitations, why didn't he pan out in the NFL?
I mean, a lot of reasons. I think one, he's okay. You can be Tom Brady is not a mobile guy, right? But he had just obviously knew when he was like unbelievable pre-snap decision making, just a step above, right? Like what what he had. So I mean, and I also just think too, there's just it's just a different level where if you look at like some like highlights from just even Notre Dame that last year where Clausen was awesome, like he was really, really good. Well, he was throwing to Michael Floyd and Golden Tate and Kyle Rudolph. So his three best guys were better than anybody else, really, that they were going to play against, right? So he had that. And then you go into the NFL and you don't got that anymore, right? Wasn't like he walked into a situation where he's whatever. So he might not be a guy who's good enough to like elevate other people or whatever. So that's part of it. I mean, mobility is part of it. I just also just think that like some guys just peak at a certain point, and that was his kind of peak or whatever, right? And I also think if you're someone who's really, really good when you're very, very young, when you're not the best guy anymore, not everybody is like, it doesn't always work out for those guys because it's like, now I'm not like, you like almost lose your identity, right? So I don't know for a fact that's the thing. That just like would be one of my theories of why it didn't work out, because I mean, he probably should have been at least better. He probably should have hung around and been a backup for a decade or something at the very least, but he didn't.
Yeah, I think just physically he did. It seemed like major Division I college football physically was his level.
Yeah.
And then going up a level to the pros, he's not very mobile. He was never that great as in just operating in the pocket, right? Like he didn't have the greatest pocket presence. And when he tried to move, he wasn't very mobile. So, he was very accurate, right? Like famously very accurate, but didn't have the most dynamic arm, right? He didn't have throwing on the run or anything like that, moving to his left and throwing back across his body, that sort of thing. Like, how you see these guys, rolling left, throwing post
Yeah.
routes the opposite way. Like, that's not Jimmy Clausen. That wasn't his game. So, that's how it is sometimes, right? Like, sometimes you run up against your ceiling, and that ceiling is a great college quarterback, right?
I
And
bet if
that's
it was a 7-on-7
fine.
league, he would have been phenomenal. You know what I
And
mean?
he
Like
and he
he's
did
just
do a 7-on-7
yeah,
league.
yeah, right. But
Yeah.
just
So
something like that, like I think would have been more whatever. But then I don't know. It's just everything is that much. The windows are tighter, everything. And like you said, I think that was just like he just he didn't have he didn't have enough of these special traits to kind of like overcome when he got into
right.
the NFL.
All right. What do you think each team comes out to try to do for the Ohio State game?
Um, I think Ohio State will come out. I mean, they'll play like a lot of 11 and 10 personnel. So 3 and 4 wide. I think they're going to try to get, I mean, I think this would be stupid if they didn't. They're going to try to get Jackson Smith Najigba into like, uh, one-on-ones as much as possible and try to like take advantage of it. That's one of the reasons why I think they're going to do that. And they also know that Notre Dame, that would be a question mark, is their secondary. So let's say too, they're like, okay, well, there's Clarence Lewis out there. It's like, well, you know that in this last game he struggled. It's like, well, we're going to attack him. I think they're going to go and attack Clarence Lewis. And if say he's not starting, it's like it's freshman Jaden Mickey. Well, they're going after the freshman, right? Like that to me is what Ohio State's probably going to come out and do on offense, is try to figure out the weaknesses in Notre Dame secondary and attack those and try to get matchups and try to do some of the things that Notre Dame didn't do well last year and see if they got better at it. And then I think for Notre Dame, my guess is Notre Dame is going to come out and probably attack their linebackers in a lot of ways, try to get their linebackers matched up against Mayer, against Notre Dame's running backs. I think, that's one thing. I think, see a lot of screen game from the running backs, Chris Tyree, JD Price, etc. Like you're going to see those guys like in matchups trying to win against a position for Ohio State that wasn't a good position last year. Right. And I think they're going to do a lot of screen game stuff because Jim Knowles, that's what he's known for, is the blitz. Right. So they're going to try to take advantage and try to like counteract some of that blitz stuff. So that would be my guess as of now, what both teams are going to do.
I think Notre Dame's going to try to beat them up, just beat them because I think they'll have the advantage in the trenches on both sides, right? I think Notre Dame's offensive line will have an advantage. Now, granted, Ohio State generally has a really good front seven, but it hasn't been as good as it has been in the past. And Notre Dame's got some really good tackles. They got a really good offensive line. So, I think Notre Dame's going to go at them. And I think Notre Dame's front seven is going to have an advantage against Ohio State's offensive line, which hasn't been as good in the past either. So they just had to, change offensive line coaches. And look at this poster asked about the Tommy Rees, Jim Knowles thing, and people forget Jim Knowles did not coach in the
he did
Fiesta
not.
Bowl. So like that, what happened in the Fiesta Bowl to me is kind of like not really.
Yeah, it's not that relevant. It's a little bit in terms of like similar scheme wise, but
it's a different person calling it. I mean, it's totally different. I think an underrated aspect though is, Al Golden was around when Cincinnati was game planning against Pat Mahomes in Kansas City, and that's a good blueprint to how you want to slow down a passing game or an offense like Ohio State's.
This is another thing too. You're when you play Kansas City, you're going against Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. You have two guys that you have to worry about on every play. So it's not like, okay, here's the one guy. And that's what Ohio State's going to present. They're going to have multiple guys that you have to worry about, right? And that's kind of so I think that helps, and that's going to be something they're probably going to have to lean on quite a bit.
Okay. We have a couple more questions, and then we'll get going. What happened with DeAndre Moore that caused a sudden turn in his recruitment?
I mean, I don't know. I think there's other factors than just you know him. There's other people who are telling him to kind of like hold off and wait, and I think that's probably the biggest thing, because I think if they weren't doing that, then I think it probably would have got done and he would have committed to Notre Dame in the spring.
Yeah. There's that, and I think CJ Carr happened, right?
That is definitely a factor with what's going on now. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there was another, we've been saying, and people have commented on, they didn't agree or whatever with Notre Dame's decision to go all in on DeAndre Moore. And I told Christian on Monday, like, they really didn't go all in as much as we thought, because if you're all in, you're not taking another quarterback that would, regardless of the year, they had to know it would make some difference, either to DeAndre Moore or to CJ Carr, right? So if you're all in, you're not taking another commitment that will affect the other recruitment. So, that's part of it too. But, again, super fluid situation. We don't know how it's going to play out. We don't know where.
I would say hold off all your DeAndre Moore questions until July is what I would say.
Yeah.
That's probably what.
And I've seen in the
chat, not July 1st, like let it mingle into July. And then you're going to see, he's going to take a Texas A&M visit this weekend. And this is the other thing. If people are like, man, it's all about the NIL, it's all about the money. Well, if it is, then it might be done. You know what I mean? This weekend. Yeah. So that's, like you'll get a lot of answers right away.
Right. So what I've seen, there's been a ton of DeAndre Moore conversation in the chat, which is totally fine. It's all been good. So it's good. But what I would say is, like, we don't know. And there's a lot of conjecture, and there
was like an argument going on in the comments that was pretty funny, but I was like, I'm not disparaging them, but I'm just saying, like, both of them were just so polar opposites, and it just shows that neither of you know.
Right.
Neither of you know. No one knows, and no one will know until it gets further along. It's just how it is.
Right. All right. We're going to end with this question from Alaskan. Please rank the 2023 wide receiver board in terms of immediate impact player. Do you think no quarterback for 2023 will affect wide receiver recruiting? I wonder if Carr will show up again this weekend to chat with Greathouse. That's actually something I'm wondering as well.
I don't know if he'll show up. It's not as big of a weekend in terms of like just name, so that might play a factor in him not coming. Like, if he does, then I mean that's pretty big. I think that kind of shows a pretty big commitment on his part,
right?
To do that. I don't know. I think. Okay, I guess we'll start with the ranking the 2023 wide receiver board in terms of immediate impact. I don't know if I see a guy that I think is going to be like a guy who's going to be an immediate impact guy, like, or have the potential to be like Tobias Merriweather in this cycle, even though he's coming in the summer, but like, or should be on campus like now, I guess, right? Like, he's someone that I watched and I was like, yeah, this guy has a chance to play and make some plays this year.
Mm-hmm.
And CJ Williams, if they would have kept on, he would have been that as well. But I don't know if I see a guy that I'm like convinced will do that. And I think I would have to wait on that question until I see like senior film, because there isn't a guy that I think is going to make any kind of immediate impact. I think a lot of guys can be really good. I just don't think guys are going to be making any kind of immediate impact right away based on what I've seen now, but could change. And as a senior, I don't know. How do you feel, Greg?
I think Braylon James could. For one, they're Lindsey's out after this year. Lindsey's moving on. So is Avery Davis. And they're going to need a vertical guy. They're going to need a vertical guy. They're going to need a deep threat. And I think Braylon James can come in and at least be part of the rotation, right? Like, maybe 3-4, 4-5, something like that in the rotation. I think he could do it. If Rico Flores comes in, I don't know. I'd have to see how he adjusts to, I guess, the higher level of play. The other person is like Greathouse. I think Greathouse definitely could, because he's gone against some major competition in Texas, right? And playing against Peyton Bowen's team, winning state and that sort of thing. And I think his game is mature enough to where he's a good, I think he's a really good route runner. And I think he's a physical player, and he's physically ready to go. I think so. I think between Greathouse and James, I think one of them could definitely, get on the field as freshmen. Hanafin, I mean, he would definitely see the field on special teams for sure. Like he would, that would be an immediate role for him. He probably would need a year under, Chancey Stuckey to kind of learn the ins and outs of playing receiver, a lot like Chase Claypool did. So, that's kind of how I see those guys.
Yeah. To me, it's a lot of here's a perfect example of like Kevin Austin was a guy that when I saw him as a junior, I thought, he's maybe got a shot physically, but he played in like an offense. It was like kind of like a running offense. He wasn't really refined or anything. I thought maybe he had a shot. And then I think as his like senior year kind of went along, I saw him at the opening in person and stuff too. And I was just like, yeah, he's someone who's physically going to be able to compete. And I think if he obviously would have had his act together a little bit more as a freshman, he would have made a bigger impact. So that's to me is an example of a guy like, a lot to me depends on the senior year.
I mean, I think it's a little bit graded like differently this year because there's going to be openings. There's going to be room for receivers to come in and make contributions. So anyway, that's how I see that going. With that, we are done with the questions. Thank you everyone for
submitting. Oh, we didn't get to that other one in that question though. What was the other one?
Oh.
Do you think the no quarterback for 2023 recruiting? Yeah, I mean, I do think it will have an impact if they don't get a 2023 kid. But how big of that impact will be depends on how good Tyler Buckner is this year. Because if Tyler Buckner is like lights out good and not just like not lights out good as a runner, but it's like he's like really, really progressed as a passer, and Notre Dame's passing game is like dynamic, and Styles is having a monster year, and Davis looks great, and all these kind of pieces are coming together that wise with the passing game, then I think like none of these guys will worry. They'll be like, oh, I mean, Buckner's still going to be there, and we're going to have and we got Carr coming in after and whatever like that. Then I think it becomes way less of a deal.
Yeah, I agree. The Buckner point is a really good one, because if he look, it's all in perception of the offense, right? Like that is a huge thing right now. The perception and what other programs are telling schools about, what Notre Dame's offense is going to be. So I think that makes a huge difference. And then we'll see, in my opinion, like if you have CJ Carr again coming to campus this weekend to talk to Jaden Greathouse, I mean, that, in my opinion, just further pushes him down the reclassification route, right? Again, doesn't mean he's going to do it. I'm not reporting he's going to do it or anything like that. I'm just saying that will lend itself to him, going that route. So yeah, that's my opinion. Okay. Thank you everyone for the questions. Thank you for the ISD customers for the questions. Thank you for everyone for participating in the chat. If you are tuning in to us for the first time, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and join us on a weekly basis, now bi-weekly basis, maybe tri-weekly basis. We're going to have a lot of shows coming up in summer. We're going to do more of these. We're going to do more recruiting shows with Christian. Like I said, I'm going to try to get Matt on the show. If he will pull himself away from his busyness that he's doing. He's always doing things and kind of the jack of all trades for ISD, as well as being the recruiting extraordinaire. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Go to irishsportsdaily.com for all the updates you want on recruiting and that sort of thing. Jamie's 6 Thoughts on a Thursday is going to come out tomorrow. What are you going to write about?
I'm going to write about what am I going to write about? I'm going to write about Notre Dame versus the ACC in recruiting. They're smoking the rest of the ACC in recruiting right now. I'm going to write about kind of how the comparison, the similarities between Kirby Smart and Marcus Freeman, and kind of like how, like if you look at what Rick did at Georgia is kind of similar to Brian Kelly, and how that kind of like is, what Smart did was take it to another level. I'm going to write about, some of the big boy recruiting that Notre Dame has to do against some of these top prospects that are, they're going to battle like Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State. And those guys are how important those are, because now if you want to play that game, it's like, well, those are the guys you're going to have to play in the championship games or whatever. Right. So, just a lot of that kind of stuff. And it should be good.
All right, cool. All right, everyone be on the lookout for that. Have yourself a good Wednesday, and we will talk to you soon.